We are delighted to host this session today and discuss with you together, and we hope for active engagement on the question, what can we, as a climate and development community, do to achieve India's goals of Viksit Bharat while progressing toward net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2070. So we are very thankful to NITI Aayog and their team for all the work they have done, publishing the 1,500 pages. Not all of us will have read it through, all word by word yet, but we are working on it. Having said that, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our new country director, Ulrike Ebeling, who came over from Senegal and now leading the GIZ office in India. It's a big team. She was also formerly in charge of overseeing the International Climate Initiative in the GIZ and has a long-standing development experience. Ulrike, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. Good morning, everybody. Let me begin by warmly congratulating Terry on this Silver Jubilee edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit. 25 years of convening global and national leaders around sustainability is a remarkable achievement, and we value the strong and long-standing cooperation between Terry and GIZ. I would also like to thank the ICI India Interface team, here represented by Alex and colleagues, for the kind invitation for creating this important discussion. As we await the updated Nationally Determined Contribution, NDC, and National Adaptation Plan, NAP, from India, under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change process, the reports on scenarios towards Viksit Bharat and net zero by NITI Aayog provide a valuable and timely reference point. The scenario modeling in these reports offers an integrated, economy-wide perspective on how India can align long-term development ambitions with its net zero commitment, taking into account sectoral transitions, macroeconomic implications, technology pathways, and financing needs. GIZ, under the Green and Sustainable Development Partnership, and on behalf of the German government, supports India's climate action by strengthening policy frameworks, building national and subnational capacity, piloting innovative solutions, and scaling sustainable approaches across the sectors energy, urban development, productive sectors, and ecosystem management. Germany-India cooperation in climate and sustainable development is anchored in the Green and Sustainable Development Partnership, short the GSDP, to help achieve shared climate and sustainability goals. The GSDP was agreed at the highest political level. Together, India and Germany are aligned in tackling climate change, advancing SDGs, and fulfilling the Paris Agreement commitments. India has reached 40% non-fossil power in its generation mix 9 years ahead of the 2030 target. Germany aims for net zero by 2045 and a 65% reduction in emissions by 2030 from 1990 levels. Our joint focus includes a just energy transition, green mobility, climate mitigation adaptation, agroecology, forest restoration, biodiversity, circular economy, and sustainable urban development. Through the GSDP, Germany and India intensify cooperation across public and private sectors, civil society, and research institutions. So what is our role as GIZ in all of this? In India, GIZ works with roughly 500 professionals on about 90 ongoing projects across 31 states and union territories, spanning renewable energy integration, industrial decarbonization, sustainable urban development, biodiversity, circular economy, and climate resilience. 8 of these projects are funded under the International Climate Initiative, ICI, addressing energy storage, agrivoltaics, natural carbon sinks restoration, and wetland management. 3 cross-cutting priorities guide our work at GIZ. First, institutional strengthening and policy alignment. Second, capacity development at national and subnational levels. And third, mobilizing public and private funds. Coming back to the GSDP, this special partnership is not just a collection of projects. It's a systemic cooperation framework aligned with India's long-term development trajectory. and the International Climate Initiative ICI of the German government is an integral part of it and plays a particularly catalytic role. ICI supports ambitious climate action in priority partner countries, and India has been one of them since 2008. Let me conclude by connecting the pieces. NITI Aayog provides the integrated national vision and scenario modeling. Under the Green and Sustainable Development Partnership and the ICI, GIZ India works across institutions, states, and sectors to operationalize reforms, build capacity, and implement transformative pilots. Together, this ecosystem demonstrates something powerful. India's pathway to Viksit Bharat and NITI Zero is not only about targets. It's about institutions, partnerships, and sustained transformation. The transition ahead is complex, but it's also an opportunity to redefine development in a way that is inclusive, resilient, and climate compatible. In this journey, GIZ, on behalf of the German government, remains a committed partner. Through its projects and policy partnerships, GIZ supports India in its climate action by supporting the strengthening of institutions, building capacities, piloting innovative solutions, and enabling knowledge exchange between India and Germany. Welcome again, and best wishes for forward-looking, solution-oriented discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ulrike. Let's try to fill those words with action and with ideas how to do it. We have Venu Mothkoor, Senior Energy and Climate Modeling Specialist at NITI Aayog. Thank you so much. You could carve out half an hour to present the findings. I think you have to do this probably all day long these days. So we are delighted to have you online, and I give you the floor to give us an overview of the report, scenarios towards Viksit Bharat and net zero. Over to you, Venu.
Thank you, Alex. I think just request if someone can pull up the presentation. I think firstly, enormous thanks to Alex and the country director for helping us guide through some of these important initiatives, and we've been the beneficiary of the help from the ICI partnerships and GIZ. So firstly, a big thank you firstly on that. And I'm not going to compress the 1500 pages in the next 20 minutes that I'm going to structure my thoughts. What I'm going to do is primarily I'll pick up some key insights that are coming in from these reports, and probably then during the panel discussion, some of them can probably a little bit debated. If someone cannot be able to present, okay, let me pull up the presentation myself and let me just share my screen. Just give me a moment there, 1 second. Just a moment. I hope we can see the screen.
Yes, that works.
Okay, fantastic.
If you can put it on full screen.
I think it probably must be loading now. Does it on the full screen now?
Not yet. I mean, we can see it. It's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, I can try. Maybe I'll try back again. Just a moment. Just try it again one more time. 1 second. Is it work now?
It's fine. Please go ahead.
Okay. So I think the Honorable Prime Minister has set this goal of India becoming net zero in 2021, and has also given the aspiration of India becoming a Viksit economy by 2047, celebrating 100 years of our independence. And what we trying to primarily do when we started this exercise 2 years back is to look at how do we achieve development and also then be on the path of net zero. And we probably also seen the budget announcement of 2025 interim budget, where it talks about preparing a policy document and how these energy transition pathways looks like. So it is in this context we have taken this endeavor of preparing this this scenarios document, and while we are preparing this scenarios document, there's an enormous global turbulence that has happened, especially when it comes to climate action. And I don't want to repeat many of these facts. Most of them probably are familiar to the people in the room, so I'm not going to talk about each of them, but highlight wherever there is this important message in terms of how India is actually embarking on becoming a Viksit economy and also becoming net zero, especially when the whole turbulence, especially on the global, is at a very high level. So per capita emissions in India is very, compared to other economies, other major economies, it's at very low levels. And our energy mix is substantially not so different from other economies. Even if you look at US, Germany, in fact, or China, so we have a similar energy mix as on today, and we have a short window to alter this energy mix also to achieve our development, while other economies have taken considerable years and have now set targets for becoming net zero. So within that context, we have to understand that this is an experiment which is unprecedented in nature, which India is primarily embarking upon. But this India sees it as also an opportunity rather than just looking at it as primarily a challenge. When we embarked on this exercise, there are important insights that will probably come out in the next few slides that I bring out, and we see this opportunity of setting out this unprecedented journey as a unique journey to build right and to build it much more efficiently and to build it much more sustainably. So there's an opportunity for leapfrogging into new technologies and to demonstrate a developmental model which can become a model that can be emulated by other economies. So that's in that context we are setting up this scenarios towards Viksit Bharat and net zero development pathways work. We have set up interministerial working groups. There are 11 working groups, and they've been chaired by the senior leadership of NITI and senior leadership at the Government of India. These groups have been multiple times over the course of last 2 years. There have been consultations, over 300 stakeholder consultations at various levels, and there has been consultations at individual level, industry, OEMs. While the nature of the working group is interministerial, but it does, I think it might be a little probably not correct to say that they're not ministerial only. They're also inclusive working groups which have co-opted industry, they have co-opted think tanks, and there are many knowledge partners who probably might be in the room who have helped us develop some of these work. The majority of work has been undertaken within NITI, and that's one of the success of this work that what we have taken. There are energy system models that have been used in NITI, and there have been models where we sought the help of knowledge partners, CPI, CEW, ICLAI, and there are CGU models where we kind of looked at help from World Bank, and there are many partners who helped us carve out unique work, especially, and how this whole thing has then brought together by NITI's team in terms of connecting all these together into one comprehensive approach, and then trying to understand what this actually means for India. So let me just not go too much into the methodology. I'll be happy to discuss at a later date in terms of how this endeavor has been undertaken, what kind of approaches, especially the collaboration. There are a lot of learnings on how this collaboration has been a really successful collaboration at multiple levels. So throughout this presentation and throughout the 11 reports that are in the public domain now, we talk about two scenarios primarily. The current policy scenario. The current policy scenario is not just frozen in time. It also reflects the continuous policies that have been innovated by the Government of India, and it does reflect in the results that you will see in the upcoming slides. So current policy is little different from the business as usual sense that it does reflect the policy commitments given by Government of India. Ambitious net zero scenario is an ambitious scenario where it will take us to become a net zero economy by 2070. And what has to be kept in mind is that we looked at Viksit Bharat as the sacrosanct principles primarily, and what does Viksit Bharat entails, and achieving Viksit Bharat and then trying to achieve net zero has been what has been the endeavor of this work. Now going into some of the select indicators on how do we actually gone into understanding what this work unravels. Again, as I said in the beginning, I'm just going to pick up few snippets. I'm not going to go deep into the 11 volumes that we brought out. So as I said in the beginning, opportunity we found interesting is that 85% approximately of India is yet to be built. So that's a huge opportunity if we can build it right, if we can leverage technologies, if we can leverage efficient building designs, then we don't lock into fossil. We can then set an example on how do we build it right. And as we talk about a Viksit economy, we're talking about a huge improvement in the living standards, as a result of which There will be huge growth in the appliance penetration across both rural and urban areas, and we would see massive urbanization happening in the economy. India's urbanization is around 37% today. We are talking about a significant urbanization, close to 65% by 2070 and close to 55% by 2050s. This levels of urbanization would probably mean new cities will be built every year, and that's actually an opportunity. And how do we build it? If we can leverage practices of transit-oriented development, land value capture, many other such of these practices, then we actually can do it in a much better and sustainable way. As I just reflected, the air conditioning penetration, if you look at today, is just 8% compared to other economies where it stands above 80%. So that's a huge opportunity if you can bring in these air conditioning, especially at a significantly higher efficiency rate. Then that's an opportunity that we actually do not add on to the energy, but we actually also maintain the comfortness, especially of the citizenry. Same is the case with the industry. To fuel the massive economy growth that will happen in the Indian context, for us to achieve the developmental standards of per capita income above $18,000 by 2047, there's a significant role by industries that's going to be played by manufacturing sector. We would see our per capita steel, cement, aluminium, refinery, fertilizers, many of these sectors that what we have modeled will reach some of those levels seen in the developed economies. And that would actually also mean, how do we actually meet this industrial demand much more sustainably? Can we embed efficiency into how do we meet this demand of industrial commodities? Can we think about more circularity into this? Can we think about more sustainable ways of meeting this industrial demand? Same is the case with passenger demand that I talked about. I've talked about if we can meet this transport demand much more efficiently, then there's a huge opportunity of not locking into fossil assets. Now, if you look at road transport today, India massively is fossil dependent. You've seen the electricity penetration across many vehicle segments. It is still at a low level, and there are some success stories in terms of three-wheelers and some success stories in terms of two-wheelers, but there's a huge latent potential that is possible for electrification of the road transport sector, and that we see as a massive opportunity on how do we do it and do it in the right way. So having said this, let me just then directly deep dive into some of the key results. As I said, I do not want to emphasize too many things, given that this is a short presentation. There are a lot of these details that are available in the presentation. I just want to check, you can see my screen or you're not able to see the screen?
We can see, all good.
Okay, fantastic. So coming back to the results that you see on the screen, the energy demand will grow by 2 to 2.5 times by 2070, but what you see in this picture is that major of this energy demand is driven by the industrial sector. So that's the significant story that's coming out. And difference of 20% between the current policy and net zero in 2070 is because of higher efficiency, higher circularity, and higher use of better designs in the net zero scenario compared to current policy scenario. And one of the other results that I would emphasize from this particular slide is that while you see that the building sector's demand comes down, but in terms of the absolute numbers, there's a significant growth. In terms of share, you would see this number comes down primarily because of the cooking sector, where the traditional biomass, which is inefficient, will be phased out. And what you would see a massive shift to electrification in the residential sector, in the building sector, and in the cooking sector, probably you would see a multi-fuel strategy where people, like today, probably you would see in many of the high-income households have multi-fuels in the single cooking household. So you would see much of that happening in the 2050s and in the 2070s, and that is the reason where you would see as a share terms, the building sector comes down. But what is hidden in this is primarily that a lot of the residential sector demand is driven by cooling, and that essentially means an opportunity that if we can build it much more efficiently or do it much more sustainably, then you can actually maintain your cooling demand at much more lower levels and not lock into fossil. And one of the interesting things that this work has actually also is looked into is the role of AI, how AI is going to drive up the significant energy demand. And what we've seen is that in the total buildings demand, AI is going to account for 1/3 of the demand in 2070. That's a significant story. That's a new story that is emerging. There is a talk about AI being both in terms of the contribution to the energy demand, and also AI as enabler of total factor productivity improvement. So there is a productivity improvement that's possible across the economy of delta of 0.5 to 1% in terms of how this productivity can be enabled across the economy through use of AI. And the other important point is that the significant energy demand in the industry sector largely remains in hard-to-abate sectors, and that primarily means that in the subsequent slides, how we discuss and how this energy demand can be met in a low-carbon way. So in terms of, again, the big story, and this is one of the points that CEO has emphasized in the 5 principles that, the 5 major things that comes out from our results, is the big story of the electrification. Electrification in India today stands around 21%, not so different from many other economies, except China, which is at 28% odd today. Many of the major economies today's electrification is similar to what India is at, in that sense that India will be also among the front runners in terms of embracing electrification as a core strategy on how we look at achieving net zero. And we primarily seen through these scenarios that we would need 3 times this level for us to bring down our emissions to almost close to zero by 2070. And as a snippet, I just gave you on the right-hand side what's happening in the road transport sector. Road transport sector electrification is largely negligible today. You would see 70% of that demand will be electrified by 2070, or have to be electrified by 2070 for us to bring those emissions down. And that's a massive jump. And similar is the case with industry sector. And the balance, especially in the road transport, is a role played by the biofuels. There's a role played by green hydrogen as well. Now, in terms of the electricity, again, the second story that which CEO has highlighted and I've emphasized during my presentation of the launch event, if this power primarily can be met through low carbon sources, then we're actually talking about much lower emissions, and we are talking about a significant increase of the non-fossil capacity. The heights of this bars primarily hide the fact how does the role played by nuclear. Nuclear, which is around close to 9 gigawatts today, we're talking about 300 gigawatts odd capacity of nuclear in 2070, and almost 6,500 gigawatts of solar and wind. So massive jumps of solar and wind. And what we also say is that this massive jump will also bring in certain trade-offs in terms of land intensity. There's going to be a significant land needed for deploying especially ground-mounted solar. And that is the reason in the report we talk about promoting land-neutral solutions like floating solar, agri-PV, and some of these solutions do come at a premium when it comes to ground-mounted. So how do we bring those premiums down? What kind of innovation that we can bring in? And solutions like agri-PV can actually also beneficial for the farmers primarily as well. So promoting hybrid solutions is something that we are very keen on, and in the report, and we talk about the implications of these big numbers. The story of the coal, I think, and it is equally emphasized in the report, is that coal continues to be a big driver in terms of meeting our energy demand, especially in 2050. In 2070, this capacity that remains in the power sector largely remains probably not generating significantly. But between the period of 2050 and 2070, what we will see is that coal primarily will continue to be used as a flexible asset. So in that sense, we do not see a big story of, that a lot of this capacity will remain stranded, and India will then probably have a big balance sheet problem, especially when it comes to coal assets deployment. So we probably will not see massive amount of stranded assets. Again, we haven't done any explicit detailed analysis, and that's something that we will take up hopefully after this work is launched, in the next phase of this work. But that's the story that we also want to emphasize, that coal continues to be a critical lever for us to meet the demand of 2050, especially we're talking about a massive electrification that happened in the economy. The next big thing, the grid emission factors comes down significantly by 2050s, and we are talking about 55 to 65% decline in grid emission factor, and such decline in grid emission factor actually massively means that most of the industries and transports will see an opportunity to actually benefit from electrification, because a grid intensity which is high probably will not be beneficial for many of the industries and many of the transport companies. So in that sense, we would see a massive shifts in our grid emission factors as we embark on this mission. The story on the primary energy mix, which is massively fossil today, almost 87%. This ratio will be reversed by 2070. So the 13 to 15% fossil that remains in 2070 will operate with carbon capture technologies. So that's one significant story. We see a significant role of petroleum products and a role of natural gas continues to remain in the 2070. This is primarily because we would see some of these sectors like aviation, where despite the almost 50% penetration of sustainable aviation fuel, there's going to be a significant remains of fossil assets primarily in petrochemical and in the aviation sector. So some of these sectors, especially where feedstock is especially fossil, will have the challenge, and that's where you would see natural gas and petroleum products primarily remain. And most of these products and most of these industries do operate with carbon capture. In that sense, when you will have probably zero emissions in that sense. So two big messages from this slide. Nuclear, massive story, going to play a big role in 2070. Coal, petrol, natural gas, it largely remains in hard-to-abate sectors, but does operate with carbon capture. And there's a significant role played by bioenergy in terms of sustainable aviation fuel, ethanol, and other biofuels. Now, in terms of, we talked about what's happening in terms of the big energy numbers. We've also looked at the non-energy emissions coming in from waste and agriculture sector. The big story here is that without interventions on the waste sector, and especially on the processing side, on the need for massive investments in processing, we would see that the emission numbers in the waste sector will jump from the current levels, almost doubling from the current levels. But with massive investments in the processing, we would actually see almost near zero emissions in the waste sector. So that's a huge opportunity for investments across solid waste management, domestic wastewater, and industrial wastewater. Agriculture sector in this study primarily was looked at from the context of mitigation as for benefits. We looked at primarily not excessively focused on mitigation-centric solutions. That doesn't mean that we talked about, we have underestimated the potential of massive transformation that is possible in the agriculture. We talked about crop diversification. We talked about the potential for natural farming. We talked about breed improvements. There are massive reforms that have been talked about in the agriculture sector, as a result of which we would see that the emissions in the agriculture sector are slightly lower in the net zero scenario compared to the current policy scenario. The emissions remain at current levels in the current policy scenario because we've seen this trend over the last many decades now. The agriculture sector has remained almost at the current levels. So we continue to expect that some of these levels will continue to prevail in the current policy scenario, but with massive investments and reforms that will be undertaken, we would see some of these emissions can be avoided. Now, to summarize, how does our emissions in 2070 current policy scenario can be brought down to zero, and what are these interventions which will deliver zero emissions compared to current policy scenario? This particular slide highlights some of these interventions, and as I said, the big driver is firstly the efficiency. Efficiency is not costly as other solutions, and we see a potential, a greater role played by energy efficiency. And in the upcoming slides, I'm going to highlight in some select sectors what is the potential on the energy efficiency side. As I said, massive role of electrification and clean power. And we also see a greater role played by the circular economy. So if we can meet a lot of our steel demand or aluminium demand or let's say cement demand through circularity, we can actually reduce a lot of these emissions close to almost 6 to 7%. Through efficient urban design, we can almost avoid 4% emissions in the overall compared to current policy scenario. As I said in the previous slides, the emissions that remain in the hard-to-abate sectors, where the fossil continues to be used, will be leveraging carbon capture solutions in that sense. So those are predominantly petrochemical sectors, steel, cement, and alkali primarily. Now, in terms of the specific interventions, and I'm going to probably wrap up in another 5 minutes. I understand there's so much content already that is spoken of. So I'm just going to highlight some of the key messages in the next few slides and then probably stop there. One is, as I said, there's a greater role played by the efficiency, and we see that with improvement in our efficiency standards, there's a possibility of 30 to 40% gains in terms of energy avoidance. And clean power can deliver almost 23% emission reduction. And within the clean power, we talk about massive storage that it probably has to be built out. We're talking about 3,000 gigawatts of battery storage of 6 hours. That's a massive opportunity that's possible. That's there in India. We're talking about close to 200 gigawatts of pumped hydro, nuclear of 300 gigawatts, and as I said, coal continues to be an important solution while India looks at, especially as it meets its Viksit Bharat targets. Biofuels, an important big story. India has been pushing biofuels since the G20 times. We see a huge role of the biofuels. We're talking about 20 billion liters of ethanol. We're talking about 30 billion liters of sustainable aviation fuel. We're talking about 50 million tons of green hydrogen. So huge role played by some of these biofuels and huge role played by circular economy. So I think I've kind of summarized some of these interventions already. So I'm going to move a little bit into some of the niche areas where we kind of dissected some of these elements on what's happening with the critical minerals, what's happening on the economy. So I'm going to spend next to 2 to 3 minutes, give you some snapshots of what these results actually mean. In terms of the critical minerals, one important finding that we find is that given that we are transitioning from a fossil fuel dependency to a material dependency, given we are talking about massive electrification, and this massive electrification would need significant renewables, and these renewables typically also mean accelerated demand for some of these critical mineral products. We see that copper, graphite, silicon account for almost 2/3 of our 2070 demand. We're talking about 169 million tons demand, out of which 2/3 demand is primarily in copper, graphite, and silicon. We're not underemphasizing the role of other elements. Other elements, even if it required in trace amounts, they do play a very critical role. But in terms of highlighting what constitutes the significant demand in terms of these 169 million tons, copper, graphite, silicon account for bulk of this demand. In terms of the sectors where we analyzed the critical mineral requirements, stretching from solar, wind, EV batteries, EV motors, green hydrogen electrolyzers, we see that EV batteries account for the bulk of the critical minerals demand. And we see that in the current context, large import dependency exists in case some of these critical minerals, close to 100% in terms of lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements, which can heighten, primarily given the global turbulence that is happening on the supply chains. So we probably have to strengthen our domestic exploration. We have to establish our ability to critically discover reserves, and also see circularity as a great role, especially given that much of these critical minerals can be recovered 90 to 100%. Now, in terms of the finance needs, again, I'll give you the big messages. I will leave you the details for you to read in the reports. We're talking about a massive investment requirement of 22.7 trillion. We're talking only in the context of power transport industry. We are not talking about, here again, I want to emphasize that we are not talking about the investment requirement for the infrastructure, the massive roads, the massive infrastructure in the urban side that has to be built. Those are not the investments that have been accounted for. We're only talking about major investments primarily on the energy side. In the power transport industry, we're talking about close to $22.7 trillion, almost translating to $500 billion every year, compared to what is flowing in today. It's almost $100 billion. So IEA puts around 135 billion that's flowing in the country today in terms of energy investments. So we're talking about 5 times that number to be flown for us to be net zero. We're talking about an incremental demand of 8 trillion, translating to 170 billion additional demand every year. So that's a massive amount of additional incremental demand that we need primarily to be on this mission of becoming net zero. And as I said in the beginning, in this study, we've also embarked on how much of this requirement can be mobilized domestically and externally through various set of reforms on the FDI front, on the FII front, on the institutional players front within the domestic context, within the banking system, within the NBFC system. We say that through various reforms, we can mobilize close to 16.2 trillion, which would then actually leave 6.5 trillion to be met from external sources. Now, if you look at this in the context of how much is flowing in the current context, the current CPI reports puts the flows around 17%. This has to increase at least by 3 times to meet the demand of 2070 net zero. So we talk about a massive investment needs, and again, this massive investment needs both as an opportunity and both as in terms of requirement. And on the central question about how does this net zero impact the economy in terms of is net positive on the economy, is it net negative on the economy? Without counting the core benefits, what we find interesting from our results is that net zero's impact, especially, are marginal. We can achieve net zero, we can achieve Viksit Bharat despite the higher investment required that is needed. So that's a big message that is coming out from this study. The growth remains resilient despite the higher investment needs. The growth is much more resilient, much more robust in the scenarios where foreign financing is higher, primarily because foreign financing can alleviate some of the crowding out effects, especially that which play out in the domestic context. So those crowding out effects, once they're avoided, interest rates remain largely stable, and that kind of actually helps the economy to meet various other developmental needs. So that's a big message coming out from the study. There's a massive, as a result of massive shift towards renewables, our fossil imports come down, and this fossil imports are not overshadowed by the increase from the critical minerals. So critical minerals do increase, but the benefits that come out from the fossil decline are not overshadowed by the rise in critical minerals, which are in negligible amounts compared to the critical minerals increase. So that's a mixed message that's coming in. As I said, massive amount of renewables would actually translate into a lot of land requirements, and that's in the context we talk about massive demand for land neutral solutions. And this is my last slide, and I will stop here. In terms of the social implications of the transition, we looked at various facets on the social implication side. We looked at land and water, we looked at employment, we looked at behavioral, we looked at health and other implications. But in this particular slide, I kind of highlight a few things in terms of what's happening today. Today's agriculture sector has an employment of almost 46%. This sector has to the employment has to move from agriculture to manufacturing, and that's the push that the government of India has been making through National Manufacturing Mission. Today's employment, especially in the fossil sector, is concentrated in almost around 150 districts that you can see in the left-hand map. There's close to 17.5 million that's employed in the fossil-related sectors, and that employment has to be carefully managed as we transition to net zero. And what we find interestingly is that that energy sector can create new jobs, and these can be higher than the job losses that we face in fossil sectors. With right kind of skilling and reskilling, we can set out to build a much higher employment story. To conclude, this is my last slide and I'll stop here. We talk about need for low carbon development secretariat to coordinate this gigantic exercise. What we did here, we need a permanent, probably a structure in the form of a low carbon development cell or a secretariat. To talk about the massive climate investment needs, we felt the need for a dedicated finance institution in the form of National Green Finance Institution. Hopefully in the coming months, we talk about what structure this Green Finance Institution will take place, and we talk about mission mode implementation on demand side management, circular economy, system electrification, and industrial innovation. So with this, let me just stop here and hand it over back to Alex. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Venu. Let's give him a round of applause. Also for the team on this amazing work. Thank you for presenting it. Just two minor questions. We in Germany, when we set up the annual emission reporting, we focus only on that. Then there was a secretariat, you already mentioned the secretariat. So what's the way forward? Is there already clarity on that, or is that the indication which you gave is a need for the low carbon secretariat you want to set up? And then the second question, what about adaptation? How does that come in? Is it already reflected? And maybe there's also a way forward.
Yeah, so Alex, we were actually launching a separate stream of work on the adaptation side, and hopefully this will take a couple of years to bring in the story of what is the adaptation and how resiliency will fit into this piece. So in this piece of work, given the complexity of it, we didn't bring in both the dimensions together, but that's something that we have set out to do it ourselves in the coming years now.
Thank you so much. Sorry for the other speakers and for the Q&A session. I let it run its course because it was so interesting, and I thought we all want to hear it to the end. But let's move to our input reflecting on what the work you have done and how this can move forward, and also think about what we can do as a climate and development community to make that happen and to help that happen. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Ruchika Drall, who is the head of adaptation and multiple other topics in the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Climate Change. She's one of the selected leaders in Asia, female leaders in 2020, I saw, and was sort of, outstanding, got a prize for outstanding leadership. We are delighted to have you here and hear your views in regard of adaptation and resilience in this. We heard from Venu, they're going to work on it in the next years to come. But if you could give us your insight, what we should focus on as a community, as a climate and development community, in the project work on adaptation and resilience, and give us guidance, how we can integrate that from your point of view. Maybe come to the floor.
Thank you, Alex, for the generous introduction, and a very good morning, everyone present in the room today. It is my absolute pleasure to be amongst such a rich group of experts and experience that I can see in the room. And thank you, Venu from NITI, for making the detailed presentation on what the findings of NITI has been with respect to the net zero pathways. I think the outcomes of the studies that are carried out by NITI Aayog on different areas have been very invaluable in defining the policy pathway for the country, and we hope to integrate these findings and learnings in the future policy actions that we are intending to take. As far as the net zero journey of India is concerned, we aim to achieve it by 2070. And alongside that, we also have a goal of Viksit Bharat by 2047. So these are not really, I would say, the mitigation or adaptation journey to say. These are the development transitions that we are looking at. The net zero pathway as well as the Viksit Bharat goal together form our development pathway. And the objective is to simultaneously achieve development, resilience, as well as equity. That is the goal for the country. Now, I mean, if we had been talking, say, a decade back, then the agenda of resilience building, vulnerability reduction would have been a parallel agenda and would have happened in a separate group. However, today, all of us are feeling the impacts of climate change, and resilience building adaptation is no more a choice that we have. It is a lived reality that all of us are facing across different sectors of the economy. More than half of our population depends on livelihoods that are climate sensitive. So it is no more a choice for us. And this is no more the responsibility of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. The impacts are being felt across the different sectors of the economy, and the actions also need to be taken across different quarters, across different ministries and departments. So that is the vision that we are moving ahead with, is to integrate climate resilience into the mainstream planning, policy and development. Now, if we try to understand what adaptation is, it is, I think, the best form of development. It is nothing that we have to really focus as a standalone activity. It is something that we need to consider while devising our developmental plans. We need to consider climate risk, vulnerability, economic impacts of climate change, adaptation costing, and all of that in the developmental planning. And from the science and the experience that we have had in the past, it is very evident that early investments in resilience are the most cost-effective ones. They basically avoid the future cost of reconstruction and the losses that can come because of the impacts that we are expected to see. And as I said, that these impacts are not just on some of the sectors. The agriculture sector, which is kind of the backbone of the Indian economy, is one of the most climate sensitive sectors of the country. Water is getting impacted in a big way, and so are several other sectors like health, our ecosystems, our biodiversity, which are key to our survival. So all these sectors are getting impacted, and these have been very well recognized at the international as well as the domestic level. The global goal on adaptation has identified thematic areas on which the adaptation needs to focus, and picking from those global goal on adaptation thematic areas, the Government of India has also identified 9 key sectors that are important from the adaptation perspective. And these sectors include the various ones I just highlighted, including some cross-cutting ones that includes preservation of tradition and cultural heritage. This is also one of the key areas that we are focusing on. So, and culture and heritage is not only the sector that is getting impacted by climate change, but that it can also be a sector to look at, to be able to develop local and community owned, community led solutions to the problem. So it is sector not just for the problem, but also from where the solutions are going to come up. Now, when we talk about integration of climate resilience risk into the developmental planning, there are some of the areas that one needs to focus on. The first and foremost one is to have an institutional integration of the concept. Everyone across the value chain needs to understand the risk, and the climate risk assessment and integration into the decision making needs to be integrated at the institutional level, which will definitely require capacity buildings of different stakeholders and different entities involved, but that is something that we cannot do away with. The second thing is to account for adaptation costing, to account for the economic impacts if no action is taken, and then do a cost benefit analysis of whether the investment today are the costly or a beneficial proposition. So all that mathematics needs to be done. NITI has been doing that exercise at the national level, but I think for the sectoral level, for the state level, for the local district level, and even at the enterprise level, all this mathematics needs to be done, and capacities needs to be built across the board to be able to appreciate and recognize these impacts. Now, climate proofing of infrastructure does not require only the technology and the finance. It requires some changes in the basic way we are functioning. It requires changes in the standards and the governance procedures that we have been following. There needs to be, we just don't need stronger materials to withstand the impacts of climate change. We need stronger monitoring, evaluation and learning framework. We need stronger governance frameworks to be able to quantify the outcomes of the investment that we are making. We need to ensure that the gaps and the learnings that we are getting from what we are doing are integrated into the future planning. The adaptation planning needs to be responsive and dynamic. It cannot be a static strategy that we can build. It is a learning process. All of us are going through that process, and this continuous learning needs to influence the future developmental planning. And in all of these scheme of things where we need capacities, where we need concessional financing, where we need strong MEL frameworks, the international cooperation plays a very important role, because climate change is a global issue, and so should be the solution. The solution cannot be totally the responsibility of individuals or the communities. It has to come from cooperation at the state level, at the national level, and also at the international level. talking about the cooperation, I think it is pertinent to mention the IKI cooperation that we have been having with the German partners. And since this is the session is being led by the IKI team, so I would want to appreciate and recognize the outcomes that we have been able to get out of this cooperation. And it is an opportunity not just for co-development and implementation together, it is the opportunity for mutual learning. And I think this is where the community who is present in the room today plays a very crucial role. I'm sure all of you would have been involved in some or the other capacity in taking forward these projects, not just IKI but any other bilateral project. And we encourage you to please continue doing so. And IKI has been implementing variety of projects across different sectors, and we are working on some of the new ideas also. So the future looks absolutely bright, and with the enhanced understanding, not just within the rooms that we are talking, but outside also, I think we have a very promising future, and we hope to build our capacities, our resilience, and reduce the vulnerability of not only the sectors at the national level, but also the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid. So let us try to bring those changes in the lives of the communities who are most affected by these changes, and let us continue to work together the way we have been, and continue to learn from the experiences of the past. So thank you very much for having me here. It is an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to the further deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam, for the warm words. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. And thank you for the guidance and leadership in this. Without that, it's not possible to deliver. So there's a catch-22. If nobody takes it on, like you now, you're Namita Prasad before, so it always has to be someone who pushes us, implementation agencies, to go the extra length. So very happy to hear that. On the conceptual part on adaptation, we heard the overarching concept you mentioned, development, resilience, and equity. So I think that's clear for us. We can take that into account when we write our proposals and we think about how we're going to implement, while the 9 sectors you mentioned as a key sectors are identified, and what is needed to provide decision makers on national, state, municipality level with the right tools. We need the right analysis and cost-benefit analysis and other analysis to really come to the right decision, to help them to integrate it in their institutions. So we hear you. Thanks a lot. 80% of India's 47 building stock yet to be constructed. The sector offers a major opportunity to avoid long-term energy inefficiency and carbon reductions, resilience. We saw it also in Venu's presentation. So I'm delighted to have Ashok, Kumar, Thanikonda from the GGGI, the Global Green Growth Institute, long-standing IKI partner, and hear your views, what we can do as a community focusing on buildings and support India building the right and hopefully net zero buildings. Ashok, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. Ruchika ji. So it's a warm, feeling today, being here in this conference, because I was also a student coordinator for the same thing 15 years back in the same place. But yeah, a lot has changed since then. First of all, I want to thank IKI Interface, GIZ, and the German counterparts, Dr. Ulrike, for the ongoing cooperation through our Asia Low Carbon Buildings Transition Project, which is informing a lot of what I'm sharing here today. So yeah, I mean, we're talking about low carbon buildings. The 80% of the building stock is yet to come up. The base case is very well established. Parallelly, the cooling loads are increasing. Where it's only going to get way more warmer, and we need to provide thermal comfort to our people. Now, how do we do it in a way that's not detrimental to the planet? I think let's start from the building codes, right? Your energy conservation building codes are meant to solve for this. But previously, the regime, when it was energy per unit area itself, we, because of a country with our vast kind of footprint and size, we are already struggling with, compliance, enforcement, with various things. But also, we are making progress. We have now transitioned to carbon per unit area in building compliance, right? Now, and there we are talking about both operational carbon and also the embodied carbon. Now, this is where our project is helping Government of India, the Ministry of Housing, and also the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So now, when you say that you're telling the various municipal agencies, state designated agencies, now you have to check for this carbon per unit area. Do they have the tools to calculate this carbon? The environmental product declarations for various materials, cement, steel, etc., are relatively granular in India compared to the rest of Southeast Asia, you could say, but it's not comparable to the global level. And also the awareness about these kind of tools, the availability of about these kind of tools is limited. So which is where we have developed this tool. It's called Building Emission Assessment Tool. And we are going to do a pilot with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in 5 states in this year, right? And this is a direct step in that direction to help the transition to ECSBC. But we're also training 2,000 plus stakeholders across various groups in India, whether it is the financial institutions, the architects, the ESCO companies, you name it, the government and policy makers, all of them we are training. That's another direct ICI enabled support through our project. Financing is also there. But I think in all of this, what we also have to see is that, fine, you inform people, you give them the tools, but how is the decision being made ultimately? The transition to low carbon buildings, at this point, you can argue that give or take, the additional cost is about 5 to 10%, depending on the aspiration, whether you are aspiring for LEED, platinum, because they are the only available taxonomy, right? Now, where does this cost from and cost come from, and how does it impact the decision making? That is something we have to take into consideration. We are not expecting immediate, like, the moment you show them the additional cost, the industry is going to adopt, because it's a price sensitive market, right? That is where we have to innovate with blended finance, green bonds, non-cost incentives, especially in Indian context, right? Whether it is prioritized processing times for building applications, or higher FSI for, say, green buildings and things like that, which our government partners have been trying out already. But I also want to leave us with the thought that I don't know how many people are following the AI conversation. Last week it was all over the place. Claude, which is the most hyped or in demand model right now, the first they've incubated a cohort of apps through the hackathon, right? And the first thing that came up is a product, you can all check it out, called Crossbeam. Now, Crossbeam solves for building permit applications in California, where they have this huge target of building 3,000 homes by 2030. Now, 3,000 homes is huge for California, and they're struggling with it, right? And oftentimes the challenge is that the municipal agency goes through the design drawings, they give a lot of inputs, and the contractors have to understand those technically, legally, and respond, right? This is a lot of back and forth process that is reduced by this app to probably a days or weeks from months from what it is. Now imagine 3,000 is more for California. Now what is that number for India, right? So I think we also have to adopt these kind of solutions, whether it, it's not just enough to show how much carbon is coming up because of your building. It's also important to show them what are the incentives if you reduce, quickly respond to them, right? And also the materials library, for example, right now somebody comes to you with a design for approval, you're also not having an integrated solution for, okay, here are your alternative materials which can reduce your thing. That's also something we'll work on probably in phase 2. But these are the kind of solutions I think we must all be looking at to catalyze the low carbon buildings transition. But I also want to leave you with this thought, because when you're talking about low carbon buildings, you're not just talking about a building, right? You're talking about lower carbon steel, which is green steel. You're talking about green cement. You're talking about all the green materials which are embodied in the building, which actually leads to a catalyst effect on the economy as a whole. So I'll stop at this for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashok, for those insights and remind us how important the details are if it comes to the implementation of standards, buildings, and all of this needs finance. So we're going to have an input from Labanya Prakash Jena, Director Climate Sustainable Initiative, on the question how we can mobilize that money, inside, outside, whatever you want to focus on. Maybe to give you an extra challenge, I think we saw that in 2025 the FDI went down for India. So maybe you can give some inspiration how we can turn that around and make it go up again. Labanya, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Iki, for inviting me. So we can see the numbers presented by Venu, around 6.5 trillion of gap. But mostly you will see the gap actually in the next 35 or 40 years or so, because once we become a developed economy and our financial savings would increase over time, so we can bridge that gap. So even if we can see the gap, so there are a number of reforms measures we have assumed in the financial model we work with NITI Aayog. For example, the corporate bond market currently here in India is around 16% of GDP, and we have assumed that by 2070 it will be 30% of GDP. That's one of the biggest assumptions we have in the financial model. Now the question is that how we can bridge the gap. So the number one point we have come across that the gap is not on the equity side. India is a fantastic financial market to mobilize capital for equity contribution, both by the corporations as well as institutional investors. Because if I say a pension fund, insurance companies, and mutual funds, if I combine assets of all these large institutional investors, it will be close to 2.2 trillion or so. But unfortunately, our investment is mostly going to government securities. If I say insurance companies, close to 65% of insurance companies' money going to government securities. Similarly, mutual funds, you will find mostly in equities or so. But unfortunately, our asset allocation to corporate bonds are very, very small, and which is not believable also. Particularly pension fund and insurance companies, which are liability-driven investors, they should invest massively in fixed income securities. But what we can see that either of them, they are either investing in government securities or they are investing in equity securities. Nobody is really investing in corporate bonds, although our corporate bond size is close to $750 billion today. But unfortunately, out of this 750 billion, 70% of them are issued by commercial banks and NBFC, not real companies. So the point is that how the real economy companies, it could be energy, it could be transportation or industrial sector, can raise capital from the financial market, from the capital market, which can be used in the real economies, maybe energy transition or maybe green hydrogen or maybe clean transportation or so. So that's the bigger point, how to mobilize that. So that's one way it's possible that we can see a number of reforms given by different committees set up by pension fund, PFRDA, as well IRDA, and we can see that some measures will be implemented by the regulatory authority. At the same time, I also believe that these asset managers would also change their behavioral practices in the future. We understand that they always under pressure to show that how they are performing their net asset value every month. But we can see that in the future, that asset allocation must be changed. Okay, so the 14.7 trillion number you just saw a couple of minutes back, which Venu presented, mostly the financing gap is debt side, not the equity side. Equity side, you can be able to mobilize capital, both from the domestic market as well as from foreign investor. I understand that FDI was negative in the last 4 months, but India as a country is a very, very attractive economy, and we are growing at a rate of 7.5%. We can mobilize a massive volume of FDI and foreign borrowings. That will not be a challenge. But the problem is that how to reorient the asset allocation from equity to debt. And sometimes also, I also believe that at some point of time, government also will allow private investors to mobilize capital as well. The second part is that we also discussed in the report that how we can reorient capital flows. Basically, this is the money available. When we did the model, we came out with the GDP growth, then savings, gross savings, and financial savings. Okay, what we found out that India's current economy in the households, the financial savings is only 58, 57%. Can you increase that significantly, close to 70 or 80%? Then it is possible to mobilize the capital and intermediate it through various financial institutions. Is that a possibility? So then when we also spoke about land value capture, because most of the financial savings is going to either gold or land. Okay, so how can we monetize that? That money can also be smartly used in this green transition. So third point we also come across is that creating a non-banking financial institution, which Venu just said, although India has a country, so we have set up several development financial institutions, be it IRIDA, be it Power Finance Corporation, or be it REC, or be it SECI. So there's development financial institutions, they have able to create a massive amount, mobilize massive amount of capital for certain strategic sector. Because you understand that commercial banks, many of them are listed in the stock market, they're accountable to their shareholders. So we cannot ask commercial bank, even the public sector banks, to create development value. So it means that since green transition is a strategic aspect or strategic importance for the country, so can you create a new green finance institution? It can be in the form of NBFC, or it can be a form of separate development finance institution that we have not decided yet. The point is that how this new institution can function. We have seen how the certain global green bank currently operating, and mostly you will see that they are providing capital in the form of debt, or whenever they are providing equity capital, they are providing equity capital to highly risky technology sector. Venu spoke about, for example, direct air capture technologies or sustainable aviation fuel. You cannot expect commercial banks or NBFC to provide capital for these highly risky technologies. So it means that you need to create a new institutions or raise capital from venture capital or private equity who can put money in these technologies. But unfortunately, here in India, you will not find risky capital like we see in Silicon Valley to provide capital to these risky technologies. It means that can you create this kind of institution who can provide risky equity capital to those technologies. At the same time, this new NGFI can also provide debt capital, which is able to bridge the financing gap. We cannot rely on the commercial banks. Currently, we'll see that commercial banks' exposure to the power sector is close to 4.5% or so. And we can maximize that to 6% of total credit. You cannot expect that commercial banks to increase their exposure. It will exposure to power sector, it will create asset liability mismatch. At the same time, if we see the NBFC's exposure to the power sector is close to 30%. And you cannot expect that they will further increase their exposure to the power sector. It will be constant. So what will be the additional source of capital? Definitely the capital market is reform. And we cannot expect that capital market will reform very quickly, and there will be reorientation of capital from equity to debt capital. Here the NGFI can create an important role. It can mobilize capital not only from domestic institutions, but also foreign investors as well, at a rate which is affordable to the borrowers, which is very important. Then another couple of other points is that can we increase the CAD, current account deficit? Currently, we have a current account deficit around 2.5%, and I believe that as per the model, the current account deficit is around 2.5% or 3%. So if we increase the current account deficit, that will also allow us to mobilize a massive volume of FDI as well as foreign portfolio investment, which is low now. But I believe that once our economy becomes bigger and sovereign ratings improves from BBB to single A or sometimes AA by 2050, definitely we can able to mobilize a massive amount of foreign capital, which can bridge the gap. And the last point is that we need to reorient capital. We can see that there are several risks associated with green transition. Okay, be it currency risk or be it credit risk or liquidity risk. Can you use risk mitigating instrument like blended financing, partial credit guarantee? This kind of financial instrument will definitely helpful to reorient capital flows from other sectors to green technologies. I understand that to green the economy, to grow the economy, you need to deploy capital in several sectors, not necessarily only green sector, but since it is strategic imperative for the economy, so we need to see that what is the way to reorient capital flows. With this, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Labanya. There was a lot, but very precise and clear understood. Every country context, of course, is different. The way we did it in Germany was that just the Ministry of Finance financed 2 or 3 staff members to help building the green aspect of bonds. So they don't build a new institution, they just send those team members into the bond developing process, whether it's on the private side or on the government side. It worked well, was successful. But I mean, the capacity building aspect and all of that is also, I think, important. So we hear you. And if the CDR could be increased, of course, would be great. But I'm not sure that's so easily done. Having said that, our last technical aspect, the industry transition. In India's industrial growth must align with decarbonization without compromising competitiveness, as we saw in Venu's presentation. That's not an easy task. We as a climate/economic development community working on this since years, decades, really to reconcile competitiveness and the aspect of climate change. When I came to India 2 years ago, that was really the biggest task for me, also intellectual, that there's no carbon market, there's no big incentive scheme for reducing CO2 emissions. It has to be competitive. So we developed, for example, a cement, and if the cement is only 1 rupee more expensive, even though you reduce 40% of CO2 emissions, it will not be used. So it has to be competitive, right? Because there's no market yet. Having said that, the industry transition is a very unique challenge we face. We have Chetna Aurora, Program Associate Low Carbon Economy from the Council on Energy, Environment and Water with us. Chetna, the floor is yours. How to do this?
Thank you, Dr. Alex, for the question, and thank you to the entire organizing team, GIZ colleagues, ICI colleagues, for giving me the opportunity to participate in this very insightful discussion. And special thanks to all our speakers before, as we reflect on the action priorities towards a Viksit Bharat and a net zero India. So I will be focusing my intervention on the industrial growth aspect of the transition, and specifically on how do we align industrial growth with more decarbonization priorities, etc. So to give a context, industrial growth in India roughly contributes to 28% of the GDP. And for a country of India's scale, the sector is very important given all the manufacturing priorities. Although, as Venu mentioned, that our per capita steel and cement consumption remains below the developed country averages. Given India's rising population and middle income class, the structural growth that we see ahead is that our steel, cement production will multiply many folds in future. And moving on to the emissions profile, the sector contributes around a quarter of the India's GHG emissions. And when we see at particular disaggregated industrial subclasses, steel alone accounts for 10 to 12% of the nation's emissions, and cement emissions in particular are hard to abate given a lot of emissions in this sector are process emissions. So the real question and challenge ahead of us now is that how do we deal with this development and decarbonization challenge, align these two priorities, and then also focus particularly on our MSMEs, since they form the background of our manufacturing ecosystem, as these firms are embedded in all of our supply chains, from auto components to infrastructure to mobility to renewable energy everywhere. So how do we keep these enterprises millions of these enterprises at the forefront of this transition? Because these enterprises are of immense economic value to us, because they contribute around 35% to our manufacturing activity, 45% of our exports, and roughly employ around more than 28 crore people as of now. So the encouraging part is that we have been discussing and research has shown that there have been learnings that there are technological options that are available that can be deployed to deal with the decarbonization challenges, particularly for MSMEs. But the challenge now is scale, standardization, and coordination. Because for MSMEs in particular, a big structural gap is that limited measurement and monitoring of data, of energy use and emissions. And this, in fact, in turns lowers and limits their capacity to access finance and resources as they move into this transition. So a very good example to show considerable progress has been the scheme, a very recent scheme, that is the assistance in deploying energy-efficient technologies in industries and establishment. This initiative is led by Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and several states have adopted it to kind of structurally inform MSMEs how do they measure and monitor their energy emission use in clusters, because solutions are best deployed for MSMEs in clusters, because then they have shared infrastructure, and also we can set up shared technical cells at an industrial cluster levels for them. So then for these enterprises, monitoring and reporting changes from a mandate to a more strategic business decision, which sort of incentivizes them internally. Second point is that we have been discussing a lot of solutions for long now. For example, energy efficiency, electrification is another one. And for MSMEs in particular, electrification has a really good potential because as they operate on very thin margins effectively, so switching from fossils to electrification kind of shields them from global geopolitical risk of uninterrupted and high prices volatility of fossil fuel in the global market. So that is a plus point for MSMEs. And in fact, from a very recent example is from the state of Odisha. The state notified that they have successfully engaged more than 500 MSMEs in a very clustered approach to deploy renewable energy in their establishments. So we need more programs and more focus on shared infrastructure, shared mini grids, community solar deployments, and proper industry cluster feeder planning for these enterprises. Lastly, I would like to focus on circular economy because India has a lot of import dependence for scrap, especially for ferrous metals, etc. And by now we know that circular economy approaches present a very good economic value for India. It is a very big, trillions of dollars of market and can create millions of jobs. However, in terms of its implementation, the progress has been sluggish because there are, for example, we have been engaging with the automobile industry in India, and we got to know that the scrap that they are getting for manufacturing their vehicles has around 15 to 20% of scrap content. So, and usually the scrap steel is not very automotive friendly to use in vehicles directly. So we need to monitor our scrap quality standards. Second is strengthen the EPR, the extended producer responsibility measures. Though we have certain very good examples of EPR, especially in auto recently, where the companies are required to scale up the recycling of steel used to 18% by 2035 to 2036. Although we need more strengthening and the coverage is narrow, so we need to expand the coverage in all. Lastly, as Venu discussed, that we do need a lot of frontier technologies like green hydrogen, CCUS, and the recent budgetary allocation also gives a very clear indication that these investment in these areas are required to kind of support our hard-to-abate sectors, especially steel, cement, etc. And focusing finally, and we have to deploy all of these solutions, keeping in mind the global competitiveness of our industries. So if we look at the global evolving carbon pricing regime, so MSMEs would need a lot of support on that front because they lack the human and the technical assistance and the capacity to kind of align with the global methodologies to calculate embedded emissions, trace the material emission intensity of their materials. So we need a national unified data system and an MRV system that can support our MSMEs while ensuring that they are also globally competitive. Because going forward, competitiveness will not only be judged by the lowest cost, but also by lowest carbon intensity. So in all, we have a lot of key strategic levers to focus as, more so because India is diversifying its industrial base to downstream industries. Even our recent engagement with a lot of states, especially Odisha and Uttarakhand, indicate that the states are envisioning to go big on downstream industries like automobile, pharma, food processing, and very new age industries as well, like semiconductors, etc. So there will be a lot of end-of-life waste management challenge as we go ahead. So it is better if circularity systems can be built into these industries at the very start, because retrofitting at a later stage will become very costly. So keeping all of these things in mind, I think the industrial transition has to be sort of very strategic, since the structure and the expansion of industries is evolving. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Chetna. I think you made it very clear how large the opportunities and how big the possibilities are in the Indian economy. So really focus on the good things, look for the champions, make it happen, support them, and on the way, of course, look where it's phasing out, where can be replaced, but in a sensitive way. I think we heard you in this approach, and I think it's much appreciated. We have made time for only one or two views or interventions from the audience. We wanted to have a little bit more time, but as I said at the beginning, I gave Venu more time for the presentation because I thought we all want to hear and see it. Can I ask for, yes, the lady over there, please introduce yourself. We have microphones here. Yeah, there's coming one.
Thank you so much. Very, very insightful panel. So my name is Shalini. I'm building a network for women in climate called NITI. So we enable more women to acquire green skills, especially urban professionals and women professionals who are transitioning into this space. I know Ruchika ma'am, you spoke about capacity building quite a few times, and so did you. So my question is, as we kind of scale and want the green economy to flourish, what do you think is the strongest ROI for investing in green skills today? And while technology pipelines are important, so is talent pipelines. So which specific policies, incentives would you think would accelerate this transition, especially around capacity building for people transitioning into this space, given that every job would need a climate or a sustainability lens going forward, or not going forward, as of now, so yeah.
Thank you so much. I think it's a very good question to think it through, how it can be integrated in all aspects of society, and capacity building is, of course, needed. Are you ready to? Yeah, I think it would be good to reflect right away.
Thank you very much. And it is exciting to know about the initiative that you mentioned of yours. And it will be good to have more, women folk with builded capacities in this particular space. And you asked specifically about capacity building. If to be able to get to this net zero goal, and also the goal of Viksit Bharat, there are several key levers that we require. And if I were to prioritize those levers in the order of their priority, I think capacity will be the first and the foremost, because you need capacities to understand the technology that you are getting. You need capacities to understand the risks and challenges that lies ahead of us. We need capacities to handle the finances if we, finally end up getting it in the right quantum. So capacity, the role of capacity building cannot be overstated. And what I primarily feel is that these capacities need to go out from the rooms that we are talking in. There is a very small community of sustainability and climate practitioners, and we keep talking to each other, building each other's knowledge on different subjects. But I think it is important to go beyond this circle and to talk to the sectors which are key to this particular transition that we are aiming for. And for that matter, I think talking to the financing community is very important. The Department of Expenditures, the CFOs of the organizations, all those stakeholders need to be informed about the risks that lies ahead and what is that we are preparing for. So with respect to capacity, I would say that it is important to go beyond the circle that we have been talking within and try to reach out to the quarters which are going to really make the difference on the ground. So I hope it added some value to what you asked.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. And I think we hear that too as implementation agencies. Brings us back to vocational training, capacity building, with the aspect of sustainability, climate change, and all those. So we're doing a kind of full circle in time on this. Thank you so much. One more. Please, the gentleman over here. Do we have a microphone? Yes. Please introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Captain K.K. Sharma from Maitri Aquatic Private Limited. We are the global leaders in atmospheric water generation. So I would like to address Venu, if he's there.
Venu? Venu's not with us.
Not there?
No, he had to leave.
Okay, not a issue. I've dropped the question to him on his mobile. Thank you so much.
But maybe you want to share what you wanted to say?
Yeah, so basically what I was wanting to know from Venu is that if NITI Aayog has considered atmospheric water generation as a sustainable solution to provide clean drinking water, especially in the water-stressed regions. In his study, I didn't find that particular aspect covered at all. And if also he could share NITI Aayog's current stance on this technology and any initiatives or plans to promote their adoption, if at all he knows of. Just to add over there, I mean, since ma'am is also here, we are already part of initiative of the Government of India towards the smart villages, which is what is coming up. Right now, there are 50 villages in Meghalaya which have been nominated as a pilot project. Okay. And the drinking water solution in all those villages is going to be that from atmospheric water generators. So that project is already on right now. Thank you so much. That's about
Thank you so much. We may have some folks in the room who were part of the team at NITI. I'm not sure if anyone wants to reflect. My only reflection would be that Venu said the adaptation aspects of the work will come in the next years. So definitely, I'm sure that will be in there. But no, we don't have anyone who raises his or her hand. Let's leave it that way.
Thank you. I've already sent the question to him.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. We have Subhashish Day, who helps us as implementation agencies to summarize what we have heard. But I think we can give a big round of applause to our panelists. That was very insightful. So Subhashish, let us hear what you think, what we should focus on what we heard today.
Thank you, Alex. First of all, thank you, GIZ and Teddy, for inviting me for this interesting session. And we started with the presentation from Venu, from NITI Aayog, and then we heard the esteemed set of panelists. I'm not going to summarize everything, and I tried to write something down while I was listening to everyone. Now, NITI Aayog, just a couple of weeks back, have launched these 11 reports. Now, what these reports does, the 11 reports released by NITI Aayog are significant, not only for their technical depth, but for how they frame climate action development as mutually reinforcing rather than competing priorities. This framing is central to India's Viksit Bharat agenda. At World Sustainable Development Summit 2026, this complementarity can be emphasized through three messages. The climate action is an accelerator of development equality. developmental transformation is a precondition for durable decarbonization. And third, institutional and financial reform serves both agendas simultaneously. In essence, the report moved the narrative that climate versus growth to climate through growth. This shift is foundational. It reframes the climate and development continuity and community, not as a balancing competing objective, but also as a co-designer of a single integrated transformation pathway. Here is how the report identifies climate and development as complementary themes. Number one, growth as a vehicle of decarbonization. The economic transformation centers around energy efficiency, industrial upgradation, infrastructure expansion, digitalization, manufacturing growth as means through which the emission intensity can decline. Second, the structural transformation drives emission reduction. India's pathway to becoming a developed economy by 2047 involves higher value-added manufacturing, urbanization with better infrastructure, and finally, technology-led productivity gains. These structural shifts are aligned with lower carbon production system, resource efficiency, improved environmental performance, and in this framing, the development transformation naturally shifts the emission trajectory. Third, we heard a lot about adaptation and resilience, and we know that the subsequent reports from NITI Aayog will deep dive into it, but nonetheless, resilience as development protection. The report emphasizes that the climate adaptation is not an environmental add-on, but it is a developmental safeguard. Climate resilience infrastructure protects economic assets. Water security underpins the agricultural productivity. Disaster risk reduction stabilizes long-term growth. Thus, adaptation spending is framed as protecting GDP gains and poverty reduction outcomes. Now, energy access and equity within the transition pathways. India's developmental model prioritizes universal access to affordable energy, industrial competitiveness, and job creation. The report suggests that the clean energy transition, if managed strategically, can expand energy access, reduce air pollution, improves health outcome, and generate employment, especially in renewable energy, storage, electric vehicles, green hydrogen. Hence, climate policy becomes a tool of inclusive development. Then coming to the final point, which is on finance, the financial architecture should align to developmental and climate goals. The report proposes a financial reforms that serves both agendas: long-term infrastructure finance, green and transition taxonomies, domestic capital mobilization and deepening, which Labanya had spoken about, and finally, the regulatory reforms that attracts additional commercial capital, both from domestic as well as foreign sources. These mechanisms are required for both economic expansion, decarbonization, illustrating that financial backbone is shared. Finally, the long-term vision anchored in dual milestone, the alignment between Viksit Bharat 2047 and the net zero GHG emission by 2070, signals that developmental maturity and climate responsibility are sequential and coordinated goals, not trade-offs. The pathway assumes that the rising income, stronger institutions, and technological capability will enable deeper decarbonization over time. With this, I would conclude my remarks. Thank you for listening.
That's it. Thank you very much for your time. I hope it was helpful. Let's continue the conversation and see you next time. Bye-bye.